Welcome to Photoactive, a podcast about photography and technology. I'm Kirk McElhearn.
And I'm Jeff Carlson.
You can find show notes, including any photos we discuss in this episode, at photoactive.co. That's photoactive.co. So on the Photoactive podcast, we talk about things that matter, like this year's Tour de France. Wasn't it wonderful, Jeff?
It was wonderful. It was mostly wonderful. I wish it would have been a little bit more of a nail biter. It was really clear to see, who was going to win. I don't know. There was not a lot of suspense, but oh man, every time it comes on and they have those like big sweeping helicopter views of the French countryside and Italy, because it started in Italy this year.
Yeah.
And I just sort of get lost in, oh, what an amazing place. I wish I was there climbing at a 9% grade on a bike. No, I do not wish that I was doing that. But it's so photogenic, amazing.
Well, since I lived in the Alps for a dozen years, the tour went through the village where I used to live again. And it's really interesting to see these familiar roads where I've been in cars and thinking that it's really not easy to drive a car up this climb. And then you see these guys on a bicycle going 20 kilometers an hour up 10% grades, as you say. But then when they're going down on the descents afterwards, there was one point where they were above 100 kilometers an hour. That's about, we're getting 65 miles, 70 miles an hour.
Crazy. Just crazy. Yeah. Also, I always love the fact that when they're making these big climbs and they're going pretty fast, and you have the spectators, often very fit spectators, running next to them up a mountain, and the spectators can't keep up. They are going so fast. It just it boggles my mind from my couch where I'm sitting drinking the hot beverage and being very comfortable.
Well, if you ever get an opportunity to see it in person, it's really something. It is the biggest popular sporting event in the world. I mean, as you see, I wouldn't say every 100 meters there's people, because there's areas where there aren't too many people, right, in the long stretches, particularly the descents. But there are so many people. Anytime you're in a town or a village where the tour is coming, everyone lines the roads, if only just to see it because it's there. These people aren't necessarily fans. They just want to see this big event, which lasts for hours, right? You have first you get the official cars and the press cars that go up in the morning. Then you get the advertising caravan about an hour or so before the race comes. Then you get the race. Then you get the cars behind them. It's interesting that, like, you're seeing the advertising caravan. You start to hear the helicopters in the distance. You know they're getting closer. And where I live, the tour basically went in front of my house. It was on a hill that wasn't steep. I want to say 3%. So when they're coming up, they're going relatively slow, and you can see them and make out faces. But when they're coming the other direction, they're going so fast, you literally cannot see who is who. But it's impressive. It's an impressive event. The one thing I thought of a couple of times is, all these climbs that I'd done in a car, all these mountains that I'd seen, you get kind of numb to that after a while when you live there. I mean, I used to like sitting outside of my house and watching the mountains grow, right? Just looking at the mountains. I was in the eastern end of a long valley, and the snow-capped peaks on the west side, and it was beautiful. But you get numb to the beauty of the landscape. And this is before I had a good camera. And at one point I showed a picture that I took in 2001 with a 1 megapixel camera. And if only I'd had a good camera when I was there and was able to take more pictures, because the number of places where, you're just driving around from one city to another, and you've got these spectacular vistas.
So you mentioning all of this is putting me in mind of an idea that I had, just kind of a throwaway idea when I was very tired and thinking about photography. Here's the question to you. Someone comes up to you and they say, Kirk, we want you to have your best photographic experience. We'll give you whatever gear you want, tickets to go, and lodging anywhere you want to go take photos. Where would that be?
Yeah, that wouldn't be very hard, because there's one area that I'd love to see, and specific areas, there are several. I spent a year in Norway when I was in my late 20s in Oslo. And my ex-wife and I, we drove around the south of Norway, but we never got to go up along the coast. Now, there's a boat called the Hurtigrute. We'll put a link in the show notes. It goes from Stavanger up to the very north and then comes back. And at the time, I assume it's still that, it was an 11-day trip. So what you would see on the trip up during the day is what you would see on the trip down at night. So you would see the entire coast during the day, right? So you'd see, I don't know, let's say 50 kilometers here during the day, and then it's night. And then on the way back, the night part you see coming down. So you get to see the whole coast. I would either want to go there or Iceland or the Lofoten Islands off the coast of Norway, or even some of the northern Scottish islands. I like that kind of isolated landscape, something like the Orkneys or the Shetlands off the coast of Scotland. So not expensive. We're not talking safaris or 5-star hotels. It's either a not very large cruise ship that goes up the coast of Norway, which originally I think was like a packet boat, a mail ship, and that would carry people and goods and mail, or a week or two on some of those isolated islands. What about you?
That's really interesting because I actually thought that you would probably go more for some place where you could get good black and white street photography. Not strictly street, but just because you like good. Well, actually, maybe that's it, because you like and appreciate good black and white street photography. But we've talked a lot on this podcast about how difficult it can be and how so much of it is garbage.
I have no desire to do street photography. I appreciate good street photography. Okay. I would do black and white photography on the coast of Norway, in the Scottish Islands, whatever, in those windswept islands, with some very old megaliths and, stone things, archaeological sites, things like that. I would probably shoot more black and white than color, but I would want to go someplace more or less isolated as opposed to I hate to say it, I'm too old to really want to travel. Particularly, you saw what happened last week. We're recording on the 23rd of July. You saw what happened last week where there was, as they were saying, a global IT outage. Imagine being in an airport at that time of year. Forget it. I don't want to go to airports. I'd much rather go to isolated places to have the time to study a landscape and to choose what to photograph.
Yeah.
And I probably wouldn't need much gear. Maybe I'd like a better Leica with 2 lenses instead of just my Q3. But I wouldn't want, I don't need anything complicated or heavy, or those days are over. Yeah.
I guess part of the question is, does this package also include someone who will carry the gear? Like the Sherpa who, like your
Yeah, I didn't think about that.
Probably not. I tend to agree with you in the sense of I would like something that has a slower pace. Like the first thing that came to my mind was someplace grand and epic like Patagonia, like amazing, landscape opportunities. But there's also a part of me, I loved being in Italy last year, and I love the little towns and the architecture, these, 400-year-old buildings packed close together in some places. That would also, border on dealing with tourists, but I would be more than happy to go in February or March or something like that when it's not as so supremely crowded and hot and sticky and all of that. So,
see, that doesn't attract me. In my years in Europe, I probably visited 20 different countries. I spent a lot of time in southern France because my ex-wife was from Provence and her parents lived about an hour from Nice. And I visited all sorts of little villages. The first year I was in France, I was in a tiny village about an hour north of Montpellier. So I've traveled in that sort of southern landscape, which is similar to northern Italy. The kind of, they have red tiles on the roof instead of black tiles. When you're in France, you can tell when you're getting toward the northern part of the country because the color of the tiles changes. If you're on a train, you see that when you're going up. Once you get a little bit north of Lyon, the tiles change from red to black because they didn't have clay. They had slate.
Yeah.
So I've already done that. And I've been to a lot of countries and I've seen cities. And if money was no object, I would want to go on a museum tour, but that's not for photography, right? There are museums I would love to visit, but you don't go there to take pictures.
No, but you find a good museum that also has a good photographic location nearby, maybe.
But it's not the same. It's not the same. See, I would want to be in a place for a week or two to be able to absorb the landscape and to be able to feel and to see some days go by and appreciate the weather and the light and times and things like that. Which you could do in northern Italy. You could do in those small towns. When you figure out when golden hour is, if the light is clear, you get the same kind of thing. The rolling hills in Tuscany, that sort of thing.
Yeah, I spent far too little time in Tuscany when I was there. So I would love to go back there and just hang out. But this also points to something that I think the start of this idea was, all right, where would you go to get good pictures? And it was very much picture focused. But you saying all these things also makes me realize that when you are traveling to go get pictures, you are traveling. And so I would also want to be in a place where I could take it easy. I could drink some good wine. I could have some good food. I can, absorb, as you say, the area and the mood and the feeling, rather than, I think, what we often end up doing just because of time and money and all of that, going and hitting like the photographic benchmarks. Like, this is the site that you have to see. Sightseeing, yeah. Which is good. There's nothing wrong with that. But like you, I'm also more drawn to, I want to hang out here and see what inspires me. That was actually one of the great things, even though when we were in Sweden this last spring, it was basically spring break. So it was 10 days, 7, 8, 9, 10 days, something like that. And so, it was a lot of sightseeing, but we also built in just being able to hang out and wander. And that made a huge difference.
Yep. If there was one city I would want to visit again, it would be Paris, because Paris is a great city for walking. And if I was going to just do street photography, I would choose Paris.
Yeah, that's a good idea. Maybe not right now during the Olympics.
No, because so we're recording on the 23rd. That means this episode comes out a week after the Olympic opening ceremony. So Paris is going to be quite crowded for the next, 2 weeks or less, 2.5 weeks, the Olympics, something like that. So you'd be best to avoid it. All right. So we had another topic we wanted to talk about, which is more technical. And it's a really important, and we're at 168 episodes. I don't think we've ever discussed image stabilization and how important it is.
There's the part of my brain that says we must have. I mean, really, we must have. I think maybe we had a guest on it.
We must have mentioned it in passing, but really?
Maybe.
It's like the last episode we talked about sensors. We never really focused on sensors before. So it's good to know that there are still topics that we can talk about.
Well, that was going to be my next question, which was, all right, what gear would you take, which you already covered, but specifically, would you take a camera that has stabilization or rely just on a lens that is stabilized, or does this not really matter? Is image stabilization really just an extraneous feature that will get you to buy a more expensive camera?
I don't know if it'll get people to buy a more expensive camera. If you notice, the X100 VI has image stabilization, and it's the first X100 to have it. A lot of Fujifilm cameras have in-body image stabilizations, or they have lens with image stabilization. But for the X100 series, it's the first time. My Q3 has it. The Q2 had it. I think the original Q had it as well. For me, and I've mentioned many times, I have a slight tremor, and for me, I have to have image stabilization, which doesn't mean that it necessarily would, that not having it would mean that if I'm shooting at 1/250th of a second, you would notice some sort of a blur. It's just to be comfortable enough to know that you've got those 2 or 3 or 4 stops that you can go slower when you need to, and to not have to think about it. It's funny because over the years, I think camera enthusiasts have gone from, we don't need image stabilization, to, well, of course we need image stabilization. And it's like all these things that, before you had airbags in the car, it's like, we don't need airbags. Now, of course, we have to have airbags. If you've ever been in an accident, you know that you have to have an airbag. It's the kind of thing that it's almost a no-brainer in every camera. And to imagine that any serious camera today doesn't have it would be surprising.
Well, you look at something like autofocus. I'm sure lots and lots of people are like, well, you don't need autofocus. It's a nice little extra. Now, I would say autofocus is amazing. And at one point, I had some Nikon lenses from when I had a Nikon body, and I bought an adapter so I could put one of them, a macro, onto my Fuji X-T1 at the time. So no image stabilization whatsoever, but also no autofocus. But I figured that would be fine if I was just using it as a macro lens. And for the most part, it was. But boy, did I miss not having autofocus. Now, that is largely because I don't have a long history of shooting with manual focus. So there are lots of people who like focusing manually is just so second nature that autofocus just gives them a slight edge. But you take something like image stabilization, where you're right. Yeah, you don't need image stabilization. But once you've had it, once you have it available, it then becomes a lot more, not important, but a lot more helpful. I think of this like when my wife and I bought our first car, it had
image stabilization?
It had image stabilization. It was amazing. It had heated seats. Well, once that car outlived its purpose, were we going to give up heated seats in the next car? Heck no, because it's a really nice thing. And I think with image stabilization, it's even more so because I've shot on camera bodies and lenses that are not stabilized, and I've shot on some that are, and you can tell the difference. I have a few examples, but
hold on. I want to talk about heated seats first because when I lived in Tours, France, this is in the late 90s, I had a Volvo V40. And it was in an accident and got totaled, and we had to get a new car, and we found a used Saab 9000, and it had heated seats. And it was like, well, it's in the car. We don't care. We're not going to ever use these heated seats.
Yeah.
Until we moved to the Alps. And let me tell you, heated seats in the Alps were quite nice. So there are things like that you may have in a car or a camera that you don't realize how important it is. We're going to link to an article by Ken Rockwell. It looks like it was written in 2010, but a lot of this hasn't changed. He's talking about why IS and VR matter. Apparently, Nikon calls it vibration reduction. Do they still do that?
I think so.
Okay.
I haven't
he's
shot
pointing
Nikon
out
for a
that there's
while.
about a 3 or 4 stop change between with and without image stabilization. And it's something that I thought of that since then, back then, you would tend to be shooting at a slower speed because you didn't have a higher ISO. And now that a lot of cameras use higher ISO, you might not even have to go to such a slow speed. He's showing a curve of sharp images versus shutter speed. And he's showing that without image stabilization, you have to go to about 125th of a second to be sharp. And with image stabilization, you can get down to a 1/15th or 1/8th of a second and still be sharp. Now, if you only could go up to, 2000 ISO back then without noise, then you were going to be using slower shutter speeds. And now that you can go faster, it might not be as necessary. But as someone with a slight tremor, I can tell you it does make a difference for the photos that I take. Another place I think it makes a difference. So I will only use a camera that has a viewfinder. For me, a camera without a viewfinder is not a real camera. But if you don't have a viewfinder, you're holding the camera away from your face and there's no stability. The viewfinder helps you stabilize the camera. So if you have is it the Ricoh GR camera, which is a popular street camera but doesn't have a viewfinder, so you're always holding it away from you and there's more of a chance of movement, even if you don't have a tremor. So it just seems to me that image stabilization, it's like a camera has to have a lens, it has to have image stabilization, right?
Yeah, I think so. So when I was shooting with the Hasselblad 907X, 907X/CFV100C.
Great sexy name.
I
Yeah.
It makes me laugh every time that I really have to say all that. And we'll link to the episode where I talk about that. That is a 100 megapixel sensor in a beautiful camera, but it had no image stabilization whatsoever. And so, like, not only was it a different form factor, like it's not something that you hold up, like it did not have a viewfinder, even though I think there was an optional
Well,
one
you
that
could
you could
add a
get.
viewfinder to it.
Yeah,
There was a viewfinder accessory.
but normally you didn't, and just the shape of it is not something you would hold up to your eyes anyway. So you're always either anchoring it to, say, like your hip or your belly with your elbows in tight, or it's just sort of being held floating in front of you, and it's a
Or
fairly
you're putting it
heavy
on a
camera.
tripod. It's really designed to be used on a tripod in a studio.
Exactly, or you're putting it on a tripod, and without the image stabilization, it was very much a, can I take this shot? Because I don't have my tripod out. I've not set it up. Will I be able to get this shot? Compounded by the fact that, 100 megapixel sensor is less forgiving than, something smaller, just because there's so much detail. If it's slightly blurry and you don't have anything offsetting that, you're going to notice even more so. And so that was really the first time when I was like, all right, now I really understand the appeal of image stabilization. I mean, obviously, I know what it is. I've not had bodies that had image stabilization. I have lenses that do. I mean, I still shoot my Fuji X-T3 that does not. But when I was in Sweden shooting the Fuji X-T5, that does have in-body image stabilization. And here's the thing. Here's the big takeaway that I have about stabilization. It allowed me to not have to think about whether I was shooting at a high enough shutter speed. And even times when it was dark and I knew that maybe this would not come out, but I needed to shoot at like 1/15th of a second. I could just do that and take the shot and have a fairly high degree of confidence that I would get a good or, great shot, because not having to worry about something in photography makes a huge difference no matter what you're doing.
So we have an article from Canon talking about image stabilization in its cameras. And if you go down near the bottom, they talk about in-body image stabilization. And they're talking about the EOS R5 and R6, which include 5-axis in-body image stabilization. And if you combine this with a lens that has image stabilization, they say that you would get 8 stops of image stabilization, which means, and I quote, you may be able to shoot handheld with a 500 millimeter lens at 1/2 second. And with a wide angle lens, you could probably shoot handheld with a 4-second exposure.
Wow.
Yeah.
I mean, honestly.
Now, my Q3 has 3 or 4 stops, right? And most cameras have 3 or 4 stops, but this is extreme. And it says that's long enough to blur moving water, but still keep the landscape sharp without the need for a tripod. That's really quite something.
As someone who has hauled around big, heavy tripods, that makes a huge, huge difference. I mean, just to get that blurred water effect and not have everything else blurry around it is really, really hard. And we should also point out, when you mentioned like holding the camera out in front of you, the reason why you can do that with such good fidelity on an iPhone is because the iPhones have amazing stabilization. In fact, I've heard videographers and professionals advocate. There's a guy named Tyler Stallman. He's brought up a couple of times, should I get a stabilized gimbal for my phone? If I'm going to be shooting video, I want to have, that super rock solid tracking or whatever. And he said, honestly, the built-in stabilization, not even with the action mode, but just the regular stabilization is really good enough that you don't need a gimbal unless you're, moving up into like another tier of filmmaking, basically. Honestly, the reason that that's there in the phone and tied to the photo system is so that you can just lift your hands anywhere. You do it up, to shoot over the top of a crowd or whatever, and you're going to get a good sharp image.
We've mostly been talking about still photos, and it's true that for video, you absolutely have to have image stabilization. It always amazes me when I'm watching a TV series or a movie and you have a handheld camera, like as if someone's sneaking up on a character and it's moving around a lot, when you know that they actually have to physically move around a lot or have a special camera without image stabilization or without a steady cam to be able to do that. And it's so unrealistic because it's a filmmaking convention, but we never see things like that. We don't see the movement when we're walking around. To us, everything looks fluid. And sometimes the image movement is so extreme that it's disturbing because it's unnatural. It's exaggerated. But yes, for video, you absolutely have to have it. And every once in a while, if I shoot a video on my iPhone, it is astounding. But I did read something in doing research for this episode that says that image stabilization really doesn't replace a gimbal. If you're doing a lot of movement side to side, the image stabilization isn't stabilizing that. It's trying to stabilize what's in the frame, but you'll still get jumpy things as you move around. Now, this Canon article talks about that they have a particular type of image stabilization. It is mode 2 panning. So if you're panning the camera to follow a moving subject, it sets the lens to ignore the panning movement and compensate only for movement that's perpendicular to the panning direction. And so the example they show is a photo of a motorcycle race. And if the camera knows that if you told the camera I'm using the panning and it knows you're panning in that direction, it doesn't try to stabilize because that would be jerky, wouldn't it? Right. So what it does is it ignores that one axis and the horizontal axis and then corrects for the vertical axis. It's really amazing technology when you think about it.
It is amazing technology. And also we have to address one more thing that comes up a lot in forums and questions and all is should you get a stabilized lens or a stabilized body or both? And at one point, a stabilized body was they were very rare, so lens was the way to go. More and more, I think Sony really started putting stabilization in all their bodies, and now others have started adding it too. More and more, I think if you're going to have a stabilized body, then you can use whatever lens and you get some amount of stabilization. And I believe that if you have a stabilized body and a stabilized lens from the same manufacturer, then those will work in tandem and sometimes give you a little bit more of a boost. But
well, that's what Canon's saying about their camera and lens. I don't think everything I've read says, a lot of people in forums would say, oh, you shouldn't use both at the same time. And everything I've read says, piffle. Use them both. It doesn't matter. Yeah. If one stabilizes, it doesn't destabilize the other. So it's really not an issue. One thing to point out about image stabilization is kind of interesting is most cameras with sensor-based image stabilization rattle. Mm-hmm. If you shake them, my Q3 does. My Q2 monochrome, I didn't hear it that much. I once sold on eBay an old Olympus camera that I bought. This was some years ago. And the person complained, said, there's something wrong with it. It's rattling. And I'm like, dude, this is normal. This is not a bug. It's a feature. It's just the way it is. And I kind of find surprising that they don't park the sensor when the camera's off.
Mm-hmm. I don't know the technical reasons for not doing that. I know that was one thing that came up when the X106 came out. People are like, hey, this is making a lot of noise and I'm not even using it. It's like, well, you have a lot of moving parts. Also, I would advise don't shake your camera just
to hear the noise. Yeah. Show your friends, hey, listen to this. Yeah. You could damage it. Yeah.
Yeah. One last thing to point out is for a long time there's been a rule of thumb that says if you have a stabilized lens and you put your camera on a tripod, you need to turn off image stabilization because the stabilization provided by the tripod could work against the lens because the lens is like searching. And that has never been a problem. And I think that is finally going out the window. Like maybe you'll get some small amount of motion, but honestly, it has never been an issue for me, and I have shot many, many, many tripod photos with image stabilization turned on.
And if you turn it off, you may forget to turn it on when you take the camera off the tripod. My Q3 has off, on, and automatic for its image stabilization settings. So I think the image stabilization only goes on below a certain shutter speed. I should have looked it up in the many hours of research I spent for this episode to know exactly when that happens. But I'm pretty sure that's how it works.
This also sounds like one of those early photo things where, yeah, I'm sure that early image stabilized lenses would move around a lot more. They didn't have as sophisticated motors as they do now. And so, yeah, that could introduce vibration into the camera as you're shooting on a tripod. But, you know, technology advances and things are much better now. They're quieter. They are the motors are smaller. And I don't know. That's just one of those things that I think just needs to be retired.
But it's interesting how some of these myths persist in forums. And I think photography forums should delete all posts that are more than 3 years old or 5 years old or something because of the change in technology. You'll do a Google search. You'll find something from 2006 talking about this. And it's going to be, 8 generations of technology earlier. And it makes no sense to think of that. So all in favor of image stabilization. I think it's the coolest thing. I couldn't use a camera without it anymore.
I would not buy a camera that didn't have it in some fashion.
Okay, should we do snapshots?
Let's do snapshots. I have a little utility that has helped me alleviate my anxiety.
Ooh. Is it a capsule or a pill?
It is neither. It's a different kind of anxiety. I got a portable charger for my Apple Watch. You're like, what? I saw this mentioned in an article, and what it is basically a keychain charger for an Apple Watch. It's a little battery-powered power bank that has a magnetic spot that you put your watch onto. You can get 1 or 2 charges to recharge your watch. And you're like, Jeff, you have lots of different cables and battery chargers that you carry and things like that. And what really pushed me over the edge is that there have been times where my watch is just lower than I would like it to be. I'm running out of power. I didn't get a chance to put it on the charger in the morning because I sleep with my watch. I don't charge it overnight. And I typically just put it on its charger while I'm working. Takes, 30, 40 minutes to charge up, and then I'm good for the rest of the day. But every once in a while, if I'm out and about, I don't have that opportunity. So that meant I either needed to bring an extra cable, have a power bank that could not charge it. It always just seemed like an annoyance. And so this is it's only a couple of inches long. It's not very thick. It recharges via USB-C. And it's been really handy to just pop my watch on when I am, say, downtown for a few hours or something. So the one that I got, it's a Joy Room portable charger for Apple Watch. It's 2,000 milliamps. And right now it's like $16 at Amazon. And actually, there's a 20% off coupon.
But you need to remember to charge the charger.
You need to remember to charge the charger, and you need to remember to bring it with you. But it's small enough that I basically just stick it in the bag that I'm carrying, and it just lives there.
The thing about the Apple Watch is you can't plug a cable into it. You have to have the charging disc. So you may have a USB-C cable for all your other things, but not this.
That's exactly it.
Good idea to stick a charging disc in your car or wherever, or in your bag or whatever.
I just want to point out that my watch right now is telling me that I have 3% battery life remaining. So
3%?
3%.
You just got up, Jeff.
I know. I haven't done anything yet today, so okay. I haven't charged it. Kirk, what do you have this week?
Well, I don't necessarily have a snapshot as such, but it's an observation. Amazon did their usual Prime Day thing where they tried to get people to buy things they don't need. And one thing that I did buy was a SanDisk Extreme portable SSD, 2 terabytes. It cost me 120 pounds. Today, if I look on Amazon, that same disk is 158 pounds. So I did save money. What I want to point out is that, we're used to the price of hard drives and SSDs dropping over time consistently. Well, that has changed. About a year ago, the price started going up because of the demand for NAND chips for AI. And all these data centers that need these fast chips in order to store data for AI things mean that the price is going up. Now this, if you look at camel.com, if you've never heard of this, this is a website that tracks Amazon prices. You take an Amazon URL and you put it in the search field. And I'm looking at the history of this disc, which launched at about 360 pounds, it looks like, floated around the 300-pound range in 2021. Then in 2022 was around 200. Then in 2023 started dropping to around 150, hit 104 in the summer of 2023, and then started climbing up again. So its current price is that of, about a year ago, if not more. If you do need new portable SSDs or any kind of SSDs, it's a good time to buy them before they go up. Or if you can't get them on Prime Day, wait till they're on sale. Keep your eyes on it, because this was the lowest price this particular one had been in many months, and they're going to be trending upwards. So this usual curve that we've seen of storage prices going down is starting to invert, and it may be a while before they catch up. Of course, maybe by the time this episode's released, all of a sudden a NAND chip factory is going to release 1 trillion chips and the prices are going to plummet. But these things tend to go in waves. I remember hard drives a few years ago were dropping and then started going up. And as photographers, you tend to want to have portable SSDs to put your photos on when you're traveling, etc. They're fast, they're practical, no moving parts, no risk. So if you are thinking of buying something, keep your eyes on the prices. Use camel.com to look at price history and get yourself an SSD when you can. Now this is, I think they're guaranteed like 5 years now. Back in the day, they were guaranteed for maybe 2 years. So I tend to trust them more. I bought this particular one because my Plex library connected to my Mac Mini is on an old spinning 5 terabyte disk, and I'm starting to get buffering when I'm watching things. So I wanted a faster, more reliable disk. So SanDisk, extreme, portable, whatever, prices are going up.
Yeah, for Prime Day, I picked up a 4 terabyte Crucial SSD, which was hilarious when I got it because it is literally smaller than the middle of my palm. But I got that because I needed a Time Machine disk. I had like a 4 terabyte spinny Time Machine disk that was failing. It's so funny. People make such a big deal out of Prime Day, and I'm like, ooh, it's hard drive day. I picked up an SSD and I picked up 2 8 terabyte drives to put in my Synology NAS. And I'm like, ooh, Nerdville time. But you know what?
For me, Prime Day is disk drives and cat food.
Oh yeah, cat food.
Because I buy all my cat food from Amazon, and these big boxes of cat food like 20% off, but they'll be eaten in 2 months, so
Perfect.
All right, that's enough for now. Till next time.
Until next time.
Thanks for listening to Photoactive. You can find show notes, including any photos we discuss in this episode, at photoactive.co. That's photoactive.co. We couldn't afford the M. You can join our Facebook group at facebook.com/groups/photoactivecast. That's photoactivecast in one word. You can subscribe to Photoactive in your favorite podcast app or on Apple Podcasts. See the links on our website. And think about leaving us a rating or review in iTunes or in your podcast app.